2017 CF 15684, State v. Nelson, back from our lunch recess. Ms. Simmons, is the bench ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Nolly, State?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Nelson, did you have a chance to talk with your attorneys regarding all the issues we discussed before our lunch recess?
Yes, I have, Your Honor.
Okay. And were you able to identify any other witnesses other than the Lieutenant Grieve that you had mentioned?
Yes, just one, Your Honor. His name is, he's a warden in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. His name is Terry O'Brien. He would corroborate virtually everything I've ever said, without, of course, putting himself in jeopardy.
Terry O'Brien?
Yes, sir.
Right. Any other witnesses that you identified?
No, Your Honor.
And with respect to Mr. O'Brien and Lieutenant Grieve, did you provide these names, one or both of those names, to any of your attorneys and any contact information so they would be able to try to reach out and make contact with them?
Not that I recall, unless if they remember. I don't recall mentioning it to them.
Okay. Why are you mentioning it now? Why didn't you mention it to them earlier if you think they're important enough to call during your case?
Well, but I just assumed that I would be taken for face value and not tried to be construed as an embellisher or a liar or whatever, things of that nature. That never dawned on me. I just figured that, you know, BOP memos, documentation that's, you know, Freedom of Information Act that they could have required. I figured that that would all come out to fruition. I wasn't, you know, everything I've ever told the court or my attorneys is 100% truthful.
You mentioned the Freedom of Information Act. Did you ask your attorneys to try to obtain documents related to these witnesses?
They've acquired a lot of BOP records. What in its entirety, I don't know what they have accumulated or been informed of. I only know a small part of it. I mean, I don't expect them to. I'm only allowed so much paper anyway in the jail situation, so, I mean, I don't know what they know or what they have.
All right. And so did you have an opportunity to talk with your attorneys about trying to call Terry O'Brien or Lieutenant Grieve or both?
I don't know what their stand is on it, but whatever they say, I'm willing to go with. If they're willing to forego it all, fine with me.
Well, have you had a chance to talk with them about what options you may have regarding these witnesses?
I would like to go on with the trial without any delay, Your Honor, rather than have Warden Terry O'Brien in a delay in the trial for continuance, et cetera, et cetera. I think it would not be in the interest of justice. I really don't believe it would be. Because what he's going to tell you is basically everything I've already said or has been presented before the court. And if he does put any credence to it, I mean, to what avail? I mean, I think in the general scheme of things, I think it would be just that we go forward without the interactions of the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
And I don't want to make assumptions, but from what you just told me, are you saying that Terry O'Brien, Lieutenant Grieve, they're not present in the courtroom or outside waiting to come in and testify?
That's correct.
Do you know where they are physically located at this time?
Not a clue.
Neither one of them?
Neither one of them. They're still employed for the Federal Bureau of Prisons somewhere in the system. Could be anywhere, California.
Do you have any contact information for them whatsoever? Telephone number, address, email, anything?
No, but they could easily be located, but, you know, still to what avail? They have them.
And as you sit here today, do you know where they are? You said they're somewhere in the system. Do you have any idea what facility they're assigned?
Oh, no, not at all, sir.
Ms. Simmons, has the defense done any investigation or been able to do any investigation? I understand you just found out about these witnesses moments ago, but do you have any idea where either Lieutenant Grieve or Terry O'Brien are located, whether they are employed still by the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
No, Your Honor, I don't have any information.
Okay. All right. And Ms. Simmons, have you had a chance to talk with your client about what would be required in order for the defense to attempt to locate Lieutenant Grieve, Terry O'Brien, in order to find out what they may have to testify to that would be relevant to this case?
Your Honor, we spoke about the options at this point. I don't have any information to locate witnesses or how to go out subpoenaing federal employee, aside from my experience previously. But we've discussed with Mr. Nelson what would be required of us if we wanted these people to appear. And as he informed the court, he indicated that he didn't want to delay the trial. So we have not.
So you discussed with Mr. Nelson the option of moving for a continuance.
Yes.
Is that correct, Mr. Nelson?
That is correct, and I would prefer not to.
You need more time to talk to your attorneys about whether you want to move for a continuance?
No, Your Honor.
And you need more time to think about whether you want to ask your attorneys to make a motion. I obviously have to hear from the state, but just to have your attorneys make a motion for a continuance for the reasons that we've discussed regarding Lieutenant Grieve and Terry O'Brien.
I'd like to proceed forward without their interactions with the court.
Okay? And then with respect to, I had also asked you to think about and talk with your attorneys about any other evidence other than these witnesses, other than your testimony, any other evidence, documents, DNA, photographs, any other evidence of any kind. You thought you needed to think about it before you could tell me whether you were aware of the existence of any such evidence that should be presented during the defense case.
I'm not aware of any, Your Honor.
All right, and with respect to your testimony, again, like in the first phase of the trial, you understand that the jury will be instructed on all the law that's applicable to this case. And as was the case in the first phase of the trial, the case would be the same here, and that is if you choose to exercise your right to not testify, the jury will be instructed. They are not to consider that. They can't hold that against you. They can't draw that inference of guilt from that. You understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
And you understand, as we discussed in the first phase of the trial, if you choose to testify, then they'll be instructed your testimony to be considered like the testimony of any other witness.
Yes, Your Honor.
And do you recall our conversation about if you take the stand, then your testimony might actually help the state meet its burden of proof? Do you understand that?
I understand that, Your Honor.
And you also understand that since the defense has presented a case and there is a burden of greater weight of the evidence for the jury to find the existence of mitigating factors, you're aware of that?
Yes.
Do you understand that if you take the stand, that you might hurt the defense case? You might lower the weight that the jury would give to the evidence. And although without your testimony, they may find the burden has been met by the greater weight of the evidence, if you take the stand, that might change. And they might find you did not meet the burden of greater weight of the evidence with respect to any of the mitigating factors.
Yeah, I understand that, Your Honor.
And as I mentioned in the first phase of the trial, although the defense did not present evidence there other than your testimony, here you have presented expert testimony. You've heard that. You've been sitting here through the whole trial, correct?
Yes.
And you've heard many if not all, of the defense witnesses have testified to a certain extent, some greater than others, but they've relied upon your reports, information provided by you. You understand that?
Yes.
And do you understand if you take the stand and the jury finds that you're someone who they just do not find credible, not only could they reject your testimony, but they could reject any other evidence to the extent it relies on your testimony or information provided by you in writing, verbally, or in any other manner. You understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
And if you consider the fact of the result of the first phase of the trial, meaning you took the stand, and nevertheless, we don't know what the jury talked about, how they weighed various witnesses. We could never know that. But what we do know is you took the stand and they found you guilty as charged and on all counts. Have you taken that into consideration in determining whether you're going to testify in this phase of the trial?
Yes, I have, Your Honor.
And do you understand that in the penalty phase, just as was the case in the first phase, you have to testify truthfully, you have to answer all the questions by your attorneys and the attorneys for the state truthfully? You understand that?
Yes, yes, I do, Your Honor.
And since now there's no dispute, you understand the fact that you are a convicted felon, that is something the jury, just on that fact alone, can reject all of your testimony. And that remains the case.
I understand, Your Honor.
You also understand that although the defense has presented a case, and so the state already has the right to present a rebuttal case in rebuttal of the evidence being presented. You understand that you may open the door for additional rebuttal evidence if you take the stand that otherwise the state would not have an opportunity to present.
Yeah, I do, Your Honor. Yes.
And do you understand that by the court denying the motion that Ms. Simmons argued earlier regarding her allocution, that I denied that motion? If you testify, you will be testifying as you did before, meaning not necessarily the same testimony, but you'll take the witness stand, you'll be sworn in, you'll be examined by your attorneys, and then the state will have the right to cross-examine you.
Yes.
And you understand that cross-examination may be of matters that you may not want to talk about, and it may not even be the purpose of you taking the stand, but nevertheless, you may have to answer those questions.
Yes.
All right, do you need more time to talk with your attorneys about whether you want to testify during this penalty phase of your trial?
No, no, Your Honor.
Do you need more time to think about whether you want to testify during the penalty phase of your trial?
No, Your Honor.
Do you want to testify during the penalty phase of your trial?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. If we can bring Mr. Nelston up to the stand.
No. Sit down.
As you recall, and unless there's an objection, so that Mr. Nelston is essentially doing what the other witnesses, he'll be sworn in standing up. He'll be standing when we bring the jury in, and then he can sit down. I go, let's just do a test, Mr. Nelston, to make sure nothing's changed with your restraints. I didn't hear anything. Defense counsel, do you want to position yourself a little closer to the stand just to make sure? Okay. All right, so Mr. Nelston, if you, is your tie adjusted? I can't see it. Is it, counsel? Okay. All right, if, sir, why don't you stand then so that I'm bringing the jury? All right, and who's going to be doing direct, Mr. Nelson? All right, Ms. Moore, is the defense ready to proceed? Mr. Nelson, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Nolly, are you doing cross-examination?
Yes, Judge.
Is state ready? All right. All right, let's bring the jury, please.
Jury's entering.
Good afternoon, members of the jury. Ms. Moore, does the defense acknowledge the jury?
Yes, Judge.
Mr. Nelson? Mr. Nolly, state?
Yes, Judge.
All right, Mr. Nelson, you can be sworn in by the clerk.
And solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state and spell your first and last name for Madam Court Reporter.
Scott Edward Nelson, February 28, 1964.
Thank you.
Judge,
Ms.
can we
Moore?
just approach briefly?
Yes. Mr. Nolly? All right, Ms. Moore.
Mr. Nelson, can you state your name for the record, please?
Scott Edward Nelson.
Okay. And Mr. Nelson, you were incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons more than once, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you remember your entrance date or your first time, the date that you first went into prison?
I believe it was in January of 1995.
Okay. And how long were you in prison during that incarceration?
Until October 29th, 2008.
When did you return to incarceration?
After that, it was July of 2009.
And how long were you incarcerated at that time?
Until November 2010.
And were you incarcerated again after that?
11 days later, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so from November of 2010 until when were you released?
December 19th of 2016.
Okay. In court so far, we've heard a lot about what the records show and what you have told previous experts about your experience in prison. But there are some additional things that you think it's important for the jury to know. Is that right?
I think it would be fair, yeah.
Okay. While you were in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, can you tell us about incidents in which the sprinkler system or fire alarms were purposefully turned on?
Yeah, that's a very common occurrence in the special housing unit or segregated housing unit. It's basically a unit with hundreds of inmates, most of which are 2 men per cell. And there's hundreds of them. And people get frustrated. The officers like to be devious and play games, aggravate. It's part of their job. It's part of deterrence. It's part of what they're trained to do, get the inmates going. So in retaliation, many inmates will break the sprinklers. I've never done that myself.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to
Sure.
interrupt, but when the sprinklers are broken, can you sort of explain what happens?
Certainly. For the first several minutes, black water, fire retardant, comes out of these sprinkler systems in order to stop the fire. But then hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water continue to flow, as well as the fire alarm is an ear-shattering, piercing sound that they keep going for up to 4, 5, 6 hours. Even though they know there's no fire, they keep as part of your punishment for someone having done this. Of course, it floods your cell, and it floods my cell and everyone else's cell. So you're ankle deep in fire retardant, dirty water, and a lot of inmates flush their toilets. Feces, urine is mixed in with the mush, and you're ankle deep in that stew, and you're stuck there for upwards of 24 hours until you pick up the mess.
So, in your experience at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, when that would happen, you had to clean it up yourself. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely.
Were you provided any sort of cleaning supplies or protective gloves or anything like that?
Never.
Okay. Something else that you thought was important was interactions with the SORT team.
Right.
Is that correct? Can you tell us about that?
The SORT team is a Special Operations Response Team. And basically, they dress up like football players in riot gear, and they'll run into a cell if they don't shoot you with a pepper ball gun, just like a paintball gun, but it shoots pepper gas. And it bruises your skin and does all kind of damage to you, and it chokes you. And, you know, it's in order to quell a unruly or violent inmate. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they use it for other reasons as well.
If your cellmate was being unruly or violent and they decided to do this, would you be affected by those pepper balls?
Yeah, you're whatever your cellmate does, you're riding with him because you're just as culpable as he is. No matter what he does, you can be a saint, and whatever punishment he gets, you're getting because you're in the cell.
There was another incident in which you were locked in a cell in Leavenworth, which is a facility. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. There's actually been books written about this one particular unit in the oldest, or one of the oldest penitentiaries in America, Leavenworth, Kansas. I think a lot of people have heard that name before. The Hot House, the book is. There's no fans, there's no air conditioning, and there's no heat. It's Kansas. It's very, very hot in the summertime there, and very, very cold in the winter. And in the unit, there's pigeons, hundreds of pigeons flying around the unit. Of course, there's feces all over the windows. Cockroaches everywhere, rats, the size of hamsters. The cops brutalize the inmates on the regular. I was up on the 5th tier, so there's no windows, there's nothing. It's 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And the treatment that you receive is brutal.
You also indicated that let me ask you this. There was a long period of time where you were kept in special housing or segregated housing units. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you saw when Mr. Gravett showed us the diagram. Is that right?
It's very accurate of the Florence, Colorado.
Okay. And
Florence, Colorado, U.S. Penitentiary.
And that would have been one of the places that you were kept in segregation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you were in segregation, were there times where you were in the unit entirely alone?
Yes.
Were there times when you had one cellmate?
Yes.
Were there times when you had 2 cellmates?
Yes.
So there were times when there was a total of 3 people within the confines of what we saw in that diagram. Is that right?
Absolutely, for months at a time.
When you were in the segregated housing units at any of the various facilities you were at, did you ever witness a murder?
Several, yes.
And did those happen? Well, when you say several, can you give us a number? Is it 1 or 2 or?
3. I've witnessed 3 murders in the years I've been incarcerated.
And when you say witness, did you actually see that happen?
2 of them, yes. 1 of them immediately after the fact.
Okay, so you've heard that the doctors and such have said that the information they have is from you, and then some other documents that are trying to corroborate the things you're saying. Is that right?
Yes.
And an important part of all of this for you has been that you have a trial within your right to a speedy trial. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you knew that in doing that, we may not be able to get some of those corroborating
Objection,
documents.
Your Honor, irrelevant.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
I believe, did the witness answer, Madam Clerk? No.
For that reason, were you asked to get brain scans?
Yes, I was.
Objection, irrelevant.
I'll overrule the objection to that question.
You can answer that one.
Yes, I was.
Did you refuse to do that?
Yes, I did.
And why did you refuse?
I didn't want to delay in the trial.
And you saw Dr. McLean testify, right?
Yes, I did.
And you spoke with her a couple times at previous to her testimony, right?
Yes, I did.
And were you concerned about cooperating with her because it might delay the trial?
At one point, yes, I was very concerned about it.
Okay. And Dr. McLean testified about a sexual assault that happened while you were in the Bureau of Prisons. Is that right?
There was a couple of them, yes,
Okay.
fortunately.
And did you experience a sexual assault in 2015?
Yes, I did.
Can you, in as little detail, you don't have to go into it too much, explain generally what happened?
Well, it was the end of October, and it went into the beginning of November of 2015, and I was at a medium security institution in Gilmore, West Virginia, federal prison, about 1,000 inmates or more. And an inmate invited me into his cell, which is very common, share some food, different things, talk. And the next thing I know, I was coming to. An officer was waking me up. I was beaten up by my cellmate, which wasn't the person who invited me into the cell, but it's kind of sketchy for me because I was unconscious. But I was raped. It wasn't the first time this has happened. It happened years before as well. Prisons are very violent.
Did you ask for, at some later point, some sort of special testing or treatment because of the sexual assault?
Yes, I asked for blood testing, for HIV and hepatitis C.
And did you get that testing done?
Yes, my entire life I had been negative for hepatitis C, but all of a sudden now I'm positive for hepatitis C. With no treatment.
Did you file or write letters or a lawsuit about that incident?
Oh, yes, I did. Matter of fact, I had documentation that I was blood tested just a month prior to the rape, and then I was blood tested a month after, and I put them together. One was negative, one was positive, put it together on a lawsuit, and I sent it to the federal jurisdiction in the West Virginia, and I filed a lawsuit on it. I subsequently withdrew the lawsuit for better treatment.
Better treatment, is that you
Yes.
said? While you were in custody, did you file other lawsuits?
I filed many lawsuits, never frivolous.
And did you also write letters to different people of authority that may be able to help you?
Oh, absolutely. United States Representative, and then later Senator Bernard Sanders, and Charles Schumer, New York and Vermont.
And when you were writing letters and lawsuits, was that about the treatment and conditions that you were faced with in the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Always, conditions of confinement.
Since your incarceration in the Orange County Jail, you've continued to write letters to people about your treatment. Is that right?
Right.
And you've continued to do that, send them to law enforcement officers or the state attorney's office. Is that right?
Yes.
Even after attorneys have suggested you don't do that.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to ask you a couple of things about just sort of your interactions with other people or when you're trying to express yourself. When you're talking or listening to other people talk, do you find it difficult to deal with interruptions?
Yes, it's actually painful for me.
Does that cause you to have a hard time staying focused on what's being talked about or asked?
Yeah, it makes me almost break down. I mean, not in a crying type of manner. It makes me break down where I can't think. I just become, I can't handle 2-3 questions at the same time. It just doesn't work.
Do you ever feel like your brain is going faster than your ability to speak the thoughts?
Yes.
Do you ever or often struggle with getting stuck or fixated on a specific topic?
Yes.
Does that happen even when someone is trying to discuss something else with you?
That's true.
Does it keep you from being able to have a conversation with someone else because all you can think about is this other thing?
Yes.
Judge, may I just have one moment?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the clerk?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
For the record, I'm approaching with what's been marked as defense exhibit Q for identification. I'm showing you this. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
How, or have you seen it before?
Yes, I have.
When did you first see it?
When United States Senator Bernie Sanders sent it to me.
Okay. And that was while you were incarcerated?
That's true.
Okay. And is this a accurate copy of the letter that you received when you were in the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Yes, that's an accurate copy. There's actually more to it as well, other pages that are involved, but that is the gist of it.
Judge, at this time, the defense would move what's been previously marked as identification Q into evidence, and I'm not sure the number, as to defense 14.
Snelling,
We object on relevance and grounds, Your Honor.
could I see the?
Yes.
The objection is overruled. What's been marked for identification is defendant's Q. For identification is admitted in evidence as defendant's exhibit 14.
That letter was a response from the warden to Senator Sanders, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was after one of the many letters that you had sent him?
Yes, inquiries which he took and sent to Congressional Affairs, Federal Bureau of Prisons, Central Office, Washington.
This specific issue was about your second, or your need for your second colostomy procedure, is that correct?
Yes.
And were you concerned that you wouldn't get that second procedure before your release?
Oh, absolutely. It was what passed overdue.
Did you get that second procedure before your release?
No, they failed to give it to me.
Okay. Judge, may I just have one moment?
Yes.
Do you currently because you didn't get the second procedure, have to wear a colostomy bag.
That's correct.
And when you were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, that was the case, is that right? The status that you had?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, did they release you with any medical equipment or any treatment or help with being able to take care of that colostomy bag?
Well, yes, they did, but how I got to that point is another matter.
Okay. So when you got out, you had an extra bag or so, is that correct?
Oh, yeah, they gave me those.
Okay. When you got out, you ultimately, I think we talked about in the last phase of the trial, became homeless. Is that right?
Ultimately, I did.
Yes. And while you were homeless, were you still having to deal with this colostomy bag?
Yes.
Judge, I don't have any other questions.
Cross-examination?
Mr. Nelson, how long did you keep Jennifer Fulford in the car before you killed her?
You're going to object to outside scope of direct.
I'll sustain the objection.
You were on felony probation at the time you killed Jennifer Fulford, weren't you?
Your Honor, I'm also going to object to outside scope of direct.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
You had previously been convicted of bank robbery when you killed Jennifer Fulford, hadn't you?
And again, I'm going to object to outside scope of direct.
Sustain the objection.
You murdered Jennifer Fulford to avoid her testifying against you,
Your Honor,
didn't you? May we approach Your Honor?
Outside of scope of direct, and I'd ask to approach.
Counsel? You don't argue in front of the jury.
Yes, sir.
Approach.
I could have Exhibit 14. Mr. Nelson, you testified about Defendant's Exhibit 14, which is a letter from a warden to Senator Sanders. Are you familiar with the contents of that letter, or do you need to look at it again?
Very familiar with it.
And in that letter, the warden states that you would not be released to a halfway house until your medical issues were resolved. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
But it's your belief, I suppose, that the Federal Bureau of Prisons somehow altered your release date?
Yes, they did.
And they did that despite telling Senator Sanders that they would not do so.
Can you imagine? Yes, they did.
So that's your opinion.
No, I can prove it.
That's your testimony under oath here today.
Yeah, I can prove it.
And how many felonies have you been convicted of, Mr. Nelson?
6, I believe, in total.
Was that before last week?
Do you want me to answer that question first? The proved, or you don't want me to discuss that?
When you testified previously, you had been convicted of 6 felonies, hadn't you?
Why are you shifting the conversation? We were just talking about me proving something, and now you don't want me to prove it because I can. Now you want to change the subject. I don't think
No,
that's...
Mr. Nelson, I asked you how many felonies you had
And I was
convicted
honest,
of
I
as
said
of...
6. And you thought I only had 3. I cleared the air for you and told you I had 6.
Non-responsive.
Rule the objection.
If you'd stop being so snippy, I'm more of a help to you than a hindrance.
Yeah, why don't you help me out, sir? What do you want to tell me?
I know, stop being snippy. I've been convicted of 6 felonies. I'm institutionalized. I've been treated like an animal for 25 years. And I've been brutalized. I've had everything. There's nothing that you can dream up that hasn't been done to me in federal custody. Nothing. Everything.
Now, Mr. Nelson, you would admit that you have given different versions to different people about whether or not you were sexually assaulted, wouldn't you?
It all depends. You have to understand, I mean, that's a very, prison sex is like an oxymoron. It's like, there's taboo. There's all kinds of ramifications and crazy things going on here when that becomes in conjunction with the other word. So yeah, I mean, you can't tell everybody the truth, and you can tell some, and you better not tell others. You better know what you're doing, because it's politics, and you're liable to end up dead.
So you have told some of the mental health professionals that you were sexually assaulted in prison, haven't you?
Yes.
You have not told all of them the same thing, have you?
It's impossible to, because they'll put you in a bad situation.
So you have misled certain mental health examiners, is that what you're saying?
Oh, I haven't misled anybody. I've been very vocal and very honest and forthcoming with the facts of those assaults. As a matter of fact, so forthcoming that the captain in the Federal Bureau of Prison, a very high-ranking official, was terminated for having set me up to have me raped at U.S. Penitentiary Lompoc in 2002, sir.
Which penitentiary, sir?
United States Penitentiary, Lompoc, California.
And which warden was that, sir?
I can't remember what warden, and I can't remember the captain's name. The captain said, and this is like 1 in a million for him, a captain, to come to a segregated housing unit and walk up to an inmate and say, you know what? I got a cellmate for you, and I'm going to say, he's coming. You're going to have a cellmate tomorrow. My personal favorite, whatever the words were.
Now, Mr. Nelson, you
And I
testified.
got raped. He lost his job.
Okay, and what year was this, sir?
2002, sir.
Yeah, you testified that you were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons on December the 19th, 2016. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And that was to a halfway house in Orlando, or in this area.
Yes, sir.
Now, ultimately, you were employed in Orlando, weren't you?
Employed? Yeah,
You got a job, didn't you?
many, many months later.
Okay, you worked for about 6 weeks, I think it was, right? And that was painting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you were provided with a place to live, weren't you?
Provided, I was given charity.
And that was a dry place to sleep, wasn't it?
Well, showering with a garden hose in the alley. Yeah, I guess you could say it was a dry place.
So you were somewhere inside, out of the elements when you went to sleep at night, weren't you, sir?
It wasn't raining on me, I could say. Yes.
And you lived there for about 6 weeks, didn't you?
Yep.
And you ultimately left that employment about September the 5th, didn't you?
You're object to outside scope of direct.
I'll overrule the objection to that particular question.
Because of my federal probation officer.
Okay, and what did your federal probation officer do that caused you to leave employment on September the 5th of 17?
You're going to object to outside scope of direct.
I'll overrule the objection to that question.
Well, what federal probation officers do is they're supposed to drug test you. And he drug tested me, see if I was dirty. I was never dirty. And he even said that, you're allowed 5 dirties. I'll give you 5 dirties, Nelson, to trying to get you on drugs. Anyway, so he shows up at my work because he has to verify where I work and where I live. I was released out of Seminole County Jail. I had no clothes, no shoelaces, no colostomy changes. I had no money, no family, no friends, no nothing. I'm walking down the street with nothing. The federal supervised release officers, the court didn't even know I was released from jail. Out of the righteousness, I show up at their doorstep.
You're going to object to narrative non-responsive.
What's the
Overrule
question?
the objection.
And so I ended up going to the federal building and said, hey, guys, I'm here. And they were like, couldn't believe I was actually there. I mean, they're like, so my federal supervised release says, what are you going to do? And he helped me over at the shelter, get in there. So now I'm in the shelter, been there about 2 months. walking around the streets of Orlando, Florida with nothing, no money, no connections, no nothing. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, out of the kindness of their heart, didn't forward my birth certificate and Social Security card, which I paid for, which I should have had, which is my right to have, but they decided to lose it on me. Of course, you know, sending someone to the street with nothing, with a colostomy, with a felon, and now no ID, no identity on top of it. I mean, is there any other way you can make it possibly harder? I mean, there's no other way. Okay, but that's what they do. I mean, they're good at it. Until days like this where I get to say something and people listen. And I can prove everything I'm saying. So anyway, the probation officer, this wonderful man by the name of Julio Dominguez. Oh, he's such a charming man. Good bona fide federal employee. So he decides to show up at my work. Now, you see, I'm supposed to admit to my employer that I'm a felon, which I did, in application and in verbal interview. I said, I've been convicted of armed bank robbery. That's it. That's as far as I needed to. I satisfied the law. And I made the mistake of being honest with Mr.
I'll sustain the objection.
After you told your employer that you had been convicted of bank robbery, what did you do next?
I informed my probation officer that I've found a place to live and I found employment. And ironically, it's the same place.
Okay. So your employer gave you somewhere to live?
Yeah,
Okay. And you lived there for about 6 weeks, didn't you?
right.
And you were getting paid, weren't you?
I received 2 checks.
You got your last check on September the 15th, didn't you, of 2017?
I've been objecting to outside scope of direct.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
When did you receive your last check, Mr. Nelson?
Your Honor, that's the same question. Same
I'll
objection.
sustain the objection.
Did you receive your final paycheck?
Your Honor, again, essentially same question, same objection.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Were you compensated completely for your work that you performed over this 6-week period?
Same objection, Judge, still outside scope of direct.
I'll overrule the objection to the question.
The answer, can you give me the question again?
Were you compensated completely for the work you performed over this 6-week period working for the individual who gave you a job?
No, sir, I was not.
So your contention is you are still owed money.
I still am.
How much money do you believe you are still owed, sir?
Your Honor, again, outside scope of direct.
Overruled.
$150, I'd say.
Now, sir, you talked about when you were in the Bureau of Prisons that on occasion inmates would set off the sprinklers or the fire suppression system in the cell block. Do you recall that?
I was just wondering what happened to Jose Dominguez. I think people would like to know what happened.
Oh, okay. Tell me about how, Mr. Dominguez. What happened to Mr. Dominguez?
Well, Mr. Dominguez showed up at my job, and it was on a Saturday afternoon, and I was working. Imagine, by the way, I would work from 5 in the morning until 10 p.m. at night, nonstop.
What kind of job was this?
It was, what kind of job didn't I do? From reconditioning vehicles to cleaning to painting to cooking to making coffee to, I was a slave, sir. They used me, and the only reason they gave me a place to live is because I was a workaholic. And I worked myself to death in order to have this existence because I'm trying to survive and abide the law. And here I am working. They gave me the grace because you're a felon and you can stay here and we'll work here. And everything was in harmony. Everything was peaceful until Mr. Dominguez, the federal employee, shows up and walks up to the owner and he says, I need to talk to him alone. And the next day he came down.
I'm sorry, wait a minute. Mr. Dominguez shows up and says, I need to talk to him alone. Who is he wanting to talk to alone?
The owner.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't quite clear about the pronoun there.
problem.
So, okay, so go ahead, sir.
So he talked to the owner and he launched off into what he said. He explained to him that, hey, he's not just here for armed bank robbery, he's here for, and he went down the whole laundry list of,
I'll sustain the objection as to the truth of the matter asserted. I'll overrule it to the extent it may have had an effect on the listener.
You can answer, sir. Go ahead.
I get interrupted and it just throws me in kilter. Just blows my mind. So he comes in and he deliberately, premeditatedly, and maliciously, he comes and blows me up in front of the owner. He has a gun, he's leaning on his gun, hands him a card. I mean, this is a pseudo-Christian, quasi-Christian guy, supposed to be a Christian owner, painter, owner of this business. And here's this federal guy, federal mark, all this stuff, and she's giving him a little golden boss card, leaning on his gun, saying, what are you, crazy? What are you, nuts for letting this guy live here? Do you know this? Down a whole laundry list of crimes, and hey, this, that. Dude, I was done. I just went from, they were actually setting another business up for me to manage. I was going to get my license back, and I mean, things were going up. I was going from homeless to now, done. I'm done.
You're going to get your license, what license?
Driver's license.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
And that was it. He got me thrown out. He got me canned and thrown out, and that's it.
And about when was this, sir?
The last weekend of the last Saturday of August 2017.
Okay. Now, moving on to your discussion about your experiences in the Bureau of Prisons, you talked about inmates in the special housing units sometimes setting off the sprinklers. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
And SHU is special housing, right?
Yes.
Not segregated housing.
It's one or the other. They're called same place.
But SHU, the S in SHU is special, right? Means special, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just so we're clear. And you said that some of the inmates would set off the sprinklers,
Yes.
and that would result in fire retardant being sprayed all over the cell block, I suppose,
Yes.
followed by a bunch of water, I guess.
Right.
And of course, fire alarm goes off.
Right.
And all of this is, I imagine, not very pleasant if you're locked in a cell, is it?
Especially when it happens like every other day.
I mean, is it more common in some institutions than others, or is it pretty much the same everywhere?
It's pretty much the same everywhere. I mean, you might get one institution that it rarely happens to, but most of them, it's pretty common. I mean, you know, violence in these segregated housing units, people are angry. They're locked in a cage with 1, 2, 3 people, and it's like, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot to make these people go crazy, especially when you get these corrupt officers, and I can prove that. And they, you know, I mean, a man needs toilet paper, right? I mean, you do, we all do. Well, what happens when he doesn't give it to you? The pleases and the hey, sir, and all that kind of goes out the window after about 4 hours. Well, what happens when the next shift? How about 12 hours later, hey, now you start kicking on the door. Oh, you're kicking on the door. Now we're going to get in the Special Operations Response Team and get their wreck in. Let them go shoot you 10 times with a pepper ball gun, run in, beat you up, and 4-point you. I've been beaten up on Christmas morning, 4-pointed like a dog by Santa Claus. Santa Claus, can you imagine having Santa 4-point you to a bed?
So,
An officer dressed up as Santa that's out playing visitor with the visitors that are coming in to meet the inmates. Hi, Santa, ho, 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 this is the Bureau of Prisons. We are so professional. And then he runs over the other part of the jail, socks me up, and 4-points me.
and this is a special response team officer
Yeah.
that was dressed up like Santa Claus when he entered your cell.
Well, he wasn't a SORT at that time, but he was Santa. He was like he was a mean Santa.
Let's go back to
All right.
the sprinklers going off.
Yes, sir.
So what you're saying is that an inmate in a cell 5, 6, 7 doors away from you can set off the sprinkler in his cell, and your sprinkler goes off too. Is that what you're saying?
No, when he breaks his, it's like an ocean of water. It's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of gallons because they don't just shut it off. I mean, they let it roll for like up to an hour. It goes through a whole cycle. So we're talking like a virtual lake of water goes down the range into every single cell. Within 2 minutes, all the cells have water in it.
Okay, but the sprinkler in your cell's not running if somebody else breaks their sprinkler head, right?
That's correct.
It's just running down the hall.
Right,
Because these are concrete buildings, right?
right.
Okay. And so, and then I think you said that you were responsible for cleaning up the mess afterwards.
Right.
I mean, you're responsible for cleaning your cell anyway, aren't you?
Well, yeah, but you're not responsible for cleaning up other men's urine and feces and fire retardant that is coming under your cell and you're ankle deep in it. I mean, you have to stand in this water. I mean, I'm stuck in it for like 12, 15 hours.
Did you ever file a lawsuit based upon that?
Nah, to me, that would be frivolous. The ones I file are bona fide big time.
Did you ever have a judgment in your favor?
I've had summary judgment, and what they do, sir, is, you know, BOP 101 is like this. Before they're ever going to give you any money, what they're going to do is they're going to put you on a plane, and that's what they do.
And you, let's see, I believe you said that you were sexually assaulted in a West Virginia facility
Yes, sir.
and filed a lawsuit based upon that,
Yes, sir.
that you ultimately dismissed.
Right.
And you asked that it be dismissed forthwith, I believe, in your pleading, didn't you?
Right.
I can have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
No further questions for this witness.
Redirect.
Judge, I don't have any other questions.
All right, members of the jury, in just a moment, we're going to take a brief recess. During the recess, you're going to leave your notepads and your pens here. During the recess, you're under all the court's instructions, including but not limited to the instruction not to discuss this case amongst yourselves with anyone else. Please follow the deputy in the jury room and bring it back as quickly as we can. Thank you. All right. Mr. Nelson, you can go back to defense table. All right, Ms. Simmons, is the defense going to rest at this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll do that when we bring the jury in, and then Mr. Null, I believe the state is going to present rebuttal.
We are, Your Honor.
Okay, and who will the first witness for the state be?
Mr. Estramera, I don't know, what's his first name? Armando Estramera. Ms. Hicks will be handling that examination.
Ms. Hicks? Okay. And who will be doing cross for that witness?
Judge, if we could have one moment.
Sure.
I'll be doing cross, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, what we're going to do, we're going to take a brief recess, and we'll come back, allow the defense, bring the jury in, allow defense to rest, and then we'll proceed to the first witness for the state. All right, we'll be in a brief recess.